The big idea that we're trying to tackle is how do we automate organizations? If you think about, the most important things that humans have ever built, organizations are a piece of it, right? We're not all atoms just floating around, like we work together, and we're able to do bigger things. We haven't really seen a huge innovation when it comes to that in a while, really since like the 1800s. The real innovation at that point in time was the joint stock company. It was an amazing American invention, actually in New York. We figured that out here. We said, hey, we can get folks together, we can give them a little bit of breathing room, limited liability, and they can go off and try to make a profit. They can try to start a business. And that transformed capitalism, it transformed America, and ultimately transformed the world. Every time there's a big revolution in technology, there tends to be a different revolution when it comes to organizational structure. And so we've been fascinated at Tribute with this idea of a DAO, a decentralized autonomous organization. And the idea is that we can figure out new ways for people that are primarily online or spending more and more time online to work together. So how do we get there? Well, we have to automate a whole bunch of stuff under the hood for that to happen. And I think what it looks like in the long run is just really, really thin layers of technology that are enabling lots and lots of different people to do things. So maybe that starts with a couple hundred people, and then it scales up to several thousand, then tens of thousands, then hundreds of thousands, then millions. And if you look at some of the biggest networks that we have, it's billions of people at this point. So I think ultimately, at some point in the future, that's what we'll see one or more of.
Welcome back to the Slow Hunch podcast. This week, I'm really excited to welcome Aaron Wright. Aaron is the CEO and co-founder of Tribute Labs, a company that we invested in at USV a few years ago that's building tools for communities to collaborate and automate financial activities like investing. And the Slow Hunch that Aaron's been on for the last 20 or so years is all about how can you harness the energy, knowledge, activity, and collective, action of online communities to solve problems really at scale, all the way back from his work at Wikipedia and Wikia in the early days to work in recent years with investing DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations that invest in crypto assets, to the work that he's doing now, which is about using AI to automate parts of the investing process. It's a hunch and a story that I've always been interested in, that I've been following through Aaron's work for a long time now. So I hope you enjoy the conversation with Aaron Wright.
I'd love to get into your story and the story of your idea. Before we do that, I should also say that we're sitting in front of the Dream Machine.
It's awesome.
Which is a product of one of our portfolio company, Bright Moments DAOs, work at the intersection of digital art and AI, which I know you care about a lot. And it listens to us, and it will be making art as we go. And so maybe we could start by you saying, who are you, and what is what do you think is the slow hunch you've been pursuing?
Yeah, so I'm Aaron. I'm the founder of Tribute Labs. I've been really working on this idea now for quite a while. And the big idea that we're trying to tackle is how do we automate organizations? So if you think about, the most important things that humans have ever built, organizations are a piece of it, right? We're not all atoms just floating around, like we work together, and we're able to do bigger things. We're able to make our lives better, our families' lives better, hopefully all of humanity's lives better. And we haven't really seen a huge innovation when it comes to that in a while, really since like the 1800s. And the real innovation at that point in time was the joint stock company.
Yep.
So everything kind of flows from that. It was an amazing American invention, actually in New York. We figured that out here. We said, hey, we can get folks together, we can give them a little bit of breathing room, limited liability, and they can go off and try to make a profit. They can try to start a business. And that transformed capitalism, it transformed America, and ultimately transformed the world.
And not just capitalism, but like coordination and cooperation in a way.
Completely.
People think about capitalism mostly from the competitive angle, but I think the point you're making is that by creating an organizational structure of a company, we've figured out a new way to work together and have our incentives aligned together and cooperate in a different way.
Completely. And it started with capitalism, but then we're like, oh, this is a pretty good way to handle the organization of capital and labor in part. Maybe we'll have not-for-profits. Maybe we'll have blended versions.
Right.
Maybe we'll have something like a mix of different organizations that's a limited liability company that enables funds. And really, we haven't seen anything huge happen in this new era that we're a part of, which is the internet era. And I think we're kind of proceeding from the early innings to the kind of middle innings.
Yep.
And every time there's a big revolution in technology, there tends to be a different revolution when it comes to organizational structure. And so we've been fascinated at Tribute with this idea of a DAO, a decentralized autonomous organization. And the idea is that we can figure out new ways for people that are primarily online or spending more and more time online to work together, so they're not sitting around just like chatting with one another, banding together maybe to effectuate some sort of social change or rip somebody down. They're able to actually do productive stuff online, whether they're in New York, whether they're in the United States, whether they're in another country. I just think long term, if you close your eyes, that's just the way more and more activity is going to happen. Doesn't mean that we don't have traditional corporations and all these other traditional forms of organizations, but in the future, I think more and more people will do stuff online in these organizations. So how do we get there? Well, we have to automate a whole bunch of stuff under the hood for that to happen. And we've been collectively just kind of obsessed with this idea for quite some time. Like, how do we get rid of the guts of these organizations using any tool available for automation that we can? So we spent a lot of time looking at blockchain technology. We've been increasingly spending time looking at all the great AI tools that are now available. And maybe there's something new like on the horizon. If there is, that we're going to explore that too. So that's the hunch that we're kind of working towards.
It's interesting. You described this as helping autonomous or helping automate organizations. Autonomous is the middle word in DAO. I think most people, if they've ever heard of the word DAO, they think of it as sort of like a crypto thing with like people holding crypto tokens. The autonomous part hasn't really been so much a part of it, I don't think, although there's a lot of automation in the middle of like smart contracts and so on. But do you think it's really about automation, or do you think it's really about some new way of coordinating, humans?
I think it's both. Right. Yeah. I think, the more you can reduce the cost of coordination, just the different shape of the organization. Right. So like as we've gotten information technology advancements, the costs of doing things have gone down. Sometimes they've gone up, right? They can get a lot more messages. There's some cost to that. But on balance, they're trending down. It's easier to do more and more stuff. And so we've been able to see like bigger and bigger organizations form from that. And I think what it looks like in the long run is just really, really thin layers of technology that are enabling lots and lots of different people to do things. So maybe that starts with a couple hundred people, and then it scales up to several thousand, then tens of thousands, then hundreds of thousands, then millions. And if you look at some of the biggest networks that we have, it's billions of people at this point. So I think ultimately, at some point in the future, that's what we'll see one or more of.
So the story of the first 20 years of the internet is about people coordinating in new ways at really, really large scale, and the various companies, protocols, platforms in the middle of the internet have kind of facilitated that. But that's not really autonomous in the sense that you're thinking about what might be possible in the next phase of the internet.
Yeah. Well, I think there's always somebody in charge of those networks at this point in time, right? Yep. They're organized in a corporation. There's a group of people that are kind of setting the rules, dictating things. They're really stewarding those networks, and it's worked great. But lots of folks that are big stakeholders, users, participants of those networks, they've grumbled like, hey, where's my voice? And so I think what we'll see emerge is more ownership. And that's where another piece of the autonomy. It's not just automating things. It's that you have the right, you're an autonomous actor in these organizations. And I think that's great. I think you see open source organizations across large networks where people have a voice, they have a say, they can make it better. different stakeholders from different parts of the planet can participate in that. I think net, could be a very healthy way to organize more and more important global functions. Maybe that's democratically, we played around with that. Maybe that's more algorithmically.
Mhm.
That could be good, that can be bad. There's good and bad things about that. But I think it's kind of that area that we really want to play around in and figure out really well. Maybe there's also non-human folks that are participating, like agents.
There already are.
Yeah,
probably.
so maybe they have a voice at some point. Who knows? It's going to be fun.
I think the agents probably
They're
certainly listening.
Yeah.
I don't know if they're
There it is.
speaking just yet, but I think they probably are. All right. I think that sets the way I hear what you're saying is we've already had the internet helping us coordinate in new ways for quite a long time, but we're probably on the precipice of something new that's possible, that's at the intersection of the brand new technologies, crypto technologies, AI technologies, and your thing is like, how do we shape that together? That's been your thing.
Yep.
So let's go way back. When did this general idea even occur to you? Like, what got you thinking about this? Where did it all start for you?
Yeah, I mean, how far back do we want to go?
As far back as you can.
I mean, so my dad did scientific research for the state of New York. They used to fund research. He was a geneticist, so he did lots of early genetic work for the state of New York. They funded it. That was his livelihood. So he actually was on the internet very early.
Wow.
So I remember him like sitting there on terminal, on like very old computers, like chatting on the internet, because that's what it was used for.
Yep.
And so I just was awash in a lot of early internet technology since I was very young.
Well, and the idea that if you're trying to solve hard problems like genetic science problems, like maybe it's easier to do that with other people in the world who don't happen to be
completely,
in your city.
But I would be on his lap while he was just like banging out early emails on like forgotten email clients, talking to different folks, and just anytime anything new came from the internet, I just was super excited. Like I completely could see where things were going. Like I vividly remember seeing like the first JPEG, like progressively getting loaded on my computer. And I was with a really great friend of mine growing up, and we literally cheered. We were like so excited to see something that was non-text based getting streamed across the internet. And so huge fans, like from the beginning, completely got engrossed, although I was way too young, like during the first wave of the internet, just on all the things that were possible for that to happen. And just always was completely obsessed with technology. Just given my age, I like wasn't able to participate in that first wave. I was like a little bit too young for that, so I kind of had to wait till Web 2 really blossomed to hop in, because I really graduated college right when the first .com crash was like in full effect.
Yeah, me too. What year was that?
That was in 2002.
Okay, yeah. I graduated in 2001. So yeah, we had the same. Yeah.
So
we were there as it was all blowing up.
So like all of the internet was just like a carcass at that point. People were like, I didn't think that this would happen. They didn't believe that the internet was a real thing. I was completely bought in hook, line, and sinker. So I knew it was going to be a real thing, and I just kind of meticulously watched all the new projects. And really what caught my attention was Wikipedia. And so I went to law school, and I was studying super late at NYU's, one of their libraries that were open all night long. And I was just couldn't figure something out. So I went to Google, searched, and Wikipedia popped up. And then next day, something else happened. Wikipedia popped up. I guess they indexed all the laws or something at that point in time. And I just thought it was super fascinating. And so I kind of fell down this early user-generated content rabbit hole. So I kind of went through law school just doing my thing. On the side, I was kind of poking around with technology, building different websites. I started that in college as well. And I graduated. I had nothing to do. I couldn't afford to go on a bar trip. So I decided to poke around and started to build a project around Wikipedia. I forked it and just started really like hacking away at some of
the actual source code of the Wikipedia app.
Right. Yeah, so Wikipedia was open source. Yep. I thought it was interesting that it was open source, that I was able to kind of fork it. I started to hack away at it. I convinced one of my friends that I grew up that we should do that together. So we started like playing around with Wikipedia. We launched a couple early experiments just with Wikipedia, collaboratively writing scripts, got like a little bit of attention. And then we built something that was kind of a hybrid of different was kind of a hybrid of what Bleacher Report is in Wikipedia, where people could write articles, they could upvote and downvote it.
Yep.
And then there was like an encyclopedia content related to it. And that caught a bit of attention.
What was that called?
It was called Armchair GM. And that got acqui-hired by Jimmy, who set up a company called Wikia.
Yep.
And so I was kind of thrust into the middle of user-generated content land as Web 2 kind of began to blossom.
So backing up to your kind of, exposure to Wikipedia, like what was the thing that really blew you away? Because we had encyclopedias, we had the internet.
Right.
What stood out as special?
I think really what it was, and at the time, right, it was mostly websites, web pages, some early chat rooms, and just, instant messenger and kind of like one-on-one chats were becoming bigger and bigger. But there wasn't something that people were building together.
Fully together.
Yeah, it was really the first time you saw the power of like read and write.
Right.
Like there was a lot of reading in the early wave of the internet. Like the e-commerce stuff, always super interesting, but not really my thing. But the fact that people were working together on something, and it was pretty clear to me early on, like it was going to be big.
It's funny, not to skip too many steps, but in some ways it's reminiscent in some ways of the sort of ChatGPT moment that we just went through a couple of years ago, where I remember the beginning of Wikipedia too, and at the time, there was a lot of skepticism around it because it was like, well, a bunch of randos on the internet can't possibly create information resources that are as correct as, the Encyclopedia Britannica. Like people didn't trust it, and people didn't even think that it was even conceivable that it could be as good.
Yeah.
It reminds me a lot of the past 2 years with LLMs and
crypto, to be honest. Like, to me, it's like both the same. But I was of the camp, and I remember those arguments. Like I'd read them on whatever early, TechCrunch or whatever they were having them. I was just completely knew that Wikipedia would be better. But to me, it really is a Library of Alexandria, right? Like that they were trying to build, and that vision, I think, was so compelling. And the fact that so many different people with such diverse backgrounds came together to build that, I just thought it was magical. And I was fortunate enough to be around in, its fairly early days, adjacently at Wikia, and you realize like it was a really special project. It was special because it was open source, right?
Yep.
It was special because it really did draw from people from around the planet. It was special because it actually had like a lot of governance and weird early social media network type bits underneath it. I think it was special just also because it was something that you couldn't have done before the internet. And that really became alluring to me. So I was kind of just steeped in like, hey, people online are pretty good folks. Like there's some bad apples. A lot of them some of those bad apples are like floating around, but in general, most people are pretty good. Most people want to be helpful. Most people want to make things better. And Wikipedia, I think, has always been a good example of that.
Incredible example of that.
Yeah.
And also cheaper, not just accurate, but like more accessible, like free, globally available. It's kind of like magic, honestly.
Yeah.
It's an incredible accomplishment, and it's a demonstration of what's possible if you connect people together on a new substrate.
Yeah, and you align people. And what was interesting is there's no incentives, right? Like people were doing it not for a monetary value or other bits. So thought that was super interesting. Kind of gave it my all at Wikia for a couple years. And it grew, and it was pretty great. It kind of started.
Wikia was started by Jimmy Wales, who started Wikipedia.
Completely, yeah.
And I don't know that many people know the story of Wikia, but like, what was it, and what was it trying to do differently?
So my best recollection was of why they started it. So Wikipedia, people came in, they were writing a whole bunch of encyclopedic pages, and other people were starting to document things that they did not consider worthy of being in the encyclopedia.
Yep.
And Jimmy and Angela, who was, I think at the time, the chairman or chairperson of the Wikimedia Foundation, thought it was horrible to like not publish all this great work.
Right.
So they bundled it together and then started to create these separate online communities.
And they were sort of like thematic sub-communities,
right?
Yeah.
And not surprisingly, they were like super deep into like geek culture. So it was like Star Trek, Star Wars, things that like are at the fringe of culture. But there was people that were super passionate about it.
Yep.
And it really came from like a place of respect where they didn't want to just delete out all this great work that's been built. So they wanted to preserve it and save it. And then they clustered it into all these different communities. And a lot of them sprouted. after the first couple years, it was pretty clear it had a big niche with like gaming and media.
Yep.
I'm not the biggest gamer, so it became like not the right and
Got
full
it.
fit for me.
Yep.
But it tapped into this notion of just like fan communities, the way people work together online. And I think overall it's pretty fascinating. And there's a tremendous number of pages. I mean, it's millions upon millions of pages at Wikia, now called Fandom, that have just been built, which is pretty wild. So the scale of like the internet is like exhibited in some sort of way there.
Right. Even when you take small parts of it and let them run, they're very, very big.
Yeah. And it was fun, lots of fun, like technical challenges that were part of it, like early CDNs and all this stuff, but that's a sidebar. But I fell in love and was already in love with like open source tech at the time.
Yep.
I was already kind of in love with this possibility, this optimistic future where people can build stuff together. And that really brought me into the land of Bitcoin. And I know Bitcoin kind of started on a forgotten corner of the internet, but it really comes from the same place, right? It was a bunch of people that saw the challenges that the current financial system had, and they wanted, I think, to show that there's a better future for this. And so Satoshi, whoever that person is or group of people was, I think they were trying to show like a different path for how we can come together online to build
Yep.
something together. So in many ways, it's a lot like Wikipedia, right? It
Yep.
came from a place where they didn't expect anything from it, had a big vision,
Looked like kind of a joke at the
looked like a
beginning
joke
from the outside.
Nobody
if you weren't a
believed
true
that it would
believer.
work, right? But a lot of people got really, really excited about it, and so I was one of those people that did.
When did you notice it? How did you get involved in it?
About like 2011, just like poking around. Some folks that were in and around Wikia were thinking about just payments in general, and like that was a big problem.
Yep.
And so was stumbling upon that. I think a lot of folks have been in like a similar boat. And it just became more and more interesting. It started to go to some meetups in New York just about it. And you realize that there was really bright people that were trying to kind of build in and around it. At the time, I went back into law. I was the first lawyer in my family, so I figured I should at least like
Practice
follow
as a
through.
lawyer?
Yeah, so I did that. I was working on some fun things, but on the side, this was really kind of captivating me.
Remind me what you were working on in Big Law, in your brief stint in Big Law.
All right, so I did a bunch of work with different intellectual property, so ranging from representing musicians and other artists to pharmaceutical companies to also doing some work and the fallout of the great financial crisis. So kind of, I was kind of in the middle of that and was super interested in Bitcoin at the same time. Maybe that was kind of the other side of the coin.
It rates, yeah.
And I was thinking a lot about why there wasn't a protocol for law, and that led me to Ethereum. And so, many people think of Bitcoin not just as a reserve currency, but as a monetary protocol.
Yep.
Whether it fulfills that vision or not, still a little bit clear. But a lot of folks were thinking about that deeply in the Bitcoin community at that time. Like, how can we have a blockchain that not just has references to Bitcoin, the asset, but a whole bunch of other assets. And I thought that was really, really interesting as a concept. And I was working super late at my legal job, working way too hard.
Working late is a theme in your life.
Yeah, it's a problem. But
Talk
I
about
was taking a cab back, driving through like the desolate streets of New York, and I was thinking about Bitcoin because I don't know why. And I thought to myself, why isn't there a protocol for law rules? And about 2-3 weeks later, Ethereum really was announced, and it kind of matched a lot of the things that I just was internally thinking about. And so I spent a lot of time after that steeping myself kind of in lots of the early ideas that were blossoming around Ethereum, and was fortunate enough to help it with its launch. Wasn't a core developer. I provided kind of more support when it came to like legal and structuring type questions. But it was great, and it was really fun to kind of watch that project get off the ground.
Well, so I think Ethereum, the beginning of Ethereum is a fascinating kind of moment, because if you think about Wikipedia as, hey, a group of people on the internet can make knowledge, and then Bitcoin is a group of people and a group of computers can sort of crowdsource a foundation for money. The big innovation with Ethereum was not just money, but also logic and programs and contracts. And so there's this notion of a smart contract in as like a program basically on Ethereum that is anybody can program against, anybody can see. And if you think about sort of Wikipedia collapsing the sort of process steps of delivering knowledge to the world, and Bitcoin collapsing all of the intermediate steps of making financial transactions, like Ethereum sort of does the same thing with logic and contracts. And now, of course, almost 10 years later, I guess 10 years later, this notion of smart contracts and all the things that you can do with them is very well understood. But back then, I think it was maybe a little bit less obvious.
I mean, nobody thought it would work. I mean, this is a thing too. Like, I'm very happy to like hop in and be fully committed when
no one thinks it's going to work.
Nobody thinks it's going to work at all. Yeah, I mean, but Ethereum really drew from a lot of great thoughts that were in the Bitcoin ecosystem, and people wanted to build it into Bitcoin. I think that Bitcoin has always had more of a conservative, hey, this is working, let's not change it bent, which is healthy. And I think it took years for them to kind of solidify that. And a bunch of the early Bitcoiners that wanted to try this out needed to basically fork Bitcoin. And so there were some early attempts to do that, or early ways to extend it. And Vitalik and the rest of the early developers realized they needed to kind of start from scratch. But the big idea with Ethereum has really been always about coordination, more than anything else. So having like a shared global state where you can run computer programs, that's a big idea. And that's something that many folks were fascinated with. And the most fascinating area in Ethereum for me was this notion of a DAO. And I don't
from the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much. I mean, the idea of a DAO really started in 2013 with this early Bitcoiner named Dan Larimer. He's gone on to do a bunch of other projects, but he was thinking about how can we not just use Bitcoin or a Bitcoin-like system to represent Bitcoins, but other assets as well. And so there was a notion that you could color Bitcoins, and that didn't really work, and you needed something like Ethereum to really make it work.
Maybe help us connect the dots between the idea of a DAO and the idea of new assets, because they're related, but maybe not obvious how.
Well, I mean, so what a blockchain is great because for the first time, you really have like a shared data structure that everybody can look to and verify and say something happened.
Universally, across the whole
internet. And that sounds really basic, but it's really important. If you think about how we coordinate, we need to establish some ground truths. And one of the ground truths that often gets established in an organization is who owns what, right? If we're going to work together, you're probably not going to want to work as hard if I own 100% of it. So we're going to divide up the ownership. Maybe we need some capital, so we're going to give it to a venture capitalist, right? So that we can get moving. But we need to know who owned what. And so you need a neutral, shared global state to do that. And Ethereum proved to be one of the early, and I think will ultimately become that neutral layer kind of for the internet across the board.
And so if you think of a DAO as a structure that a group of people coordinating around a project can use, it's fundamentally tied to the ownership graph, among that group. Basically.
Completely. So it's ownership. And then the second thing that it really does well is, it's a monetary system, right? And so Bitcoin's a monetary system. I think in the long run, we're going to see that Ethereum's a competing monetary system, and there may be some others, but you now have an asset that you can put in a bank account. And so you can't have an organization without a bank account, right? I mean, you can, but it doesn't work that well, even for not-for-profit, right? Like you need some operating capital. So early DAOs, I think they had the feeling of being like an online group, but they also had this shared bank account with them. And again, really simple concept, but really powerful, because once you have like a shared bank account, you could try to make that bank account bigger, right? You could grant that out and give that away in like a more public service type oriented way. You could, figure out different ways to allocate that capital to pay for work if that's helpful. So all these types of like new modalities began to emerge for online groups, and that's super interesting. And then the third thing you can do with Ethereum is that you can program who has access to that capital, or you can also play around with how we're going to make decisions related to it. So
Right.
if you own part of the business or part of the organization and I own part of the organization, we can maybe say we want a third party to vote on our behalf, and we can play around with all these different dynamics on how organizations operate. And that's the fun part. It's all programmable, so you have this sandbox of governance that you can play around with too, which
sounds a lot like
really
the very
fun.
beginning of our conversation about the corporate form and, being able to structure people together around ownership, around governance, around rules. Same basic idea, except that now on a very different substrate that has no paperwork, is global.
Ideally would have no paperwork.
Right, there is
It's
still
hard to get rid of paperwork.
Yeah,
But I think it's like almost Wikipedia all the way down, right? Wikipedia was great, but there was no way to compensate people for it, right? And a lot of people work very hard on Wikipedia, and they received like internal status in the group, but maybe they should have had a place where this could be their full-time job, right?
Yep.
And so I think even some of the early great examples of online communities working together, they didn't have this like monetary ownership, like shared state that really would enable all those ecosystems to grow a lot more.
Right. And so, basically Wikipedia showed us that you could have online groups, but you could connect them socially and maybe via information, but you couldn't really connect them natively in a ownership and compensation incentive model.
Yeah.
And that's what blockchains have built in, and Ethereum in particular really leaned into.
Yeah. Ethereum definitely they picked it up from Bitcoin, like early Bitcoiners. They've leaned into it. But in the Ethereum ecosystem, we attribute, that's what we're trying to lean in the most. So lots of people have talked about this. Lots of the great parts about blockchain tech is there's been a lot of really interesting ideation. It kind of has like its roadmap set out, but people need to pick up that work and really kind of build out that future. And so we're doing our best to kind of do that in the DAO space.
So then I want to get to how Tribute Labs started, what Tribute Labs does, its origins. But even before we get to that, you got involved at the beginning of Ethereum, and you were part of the group of people that were sort of hanging around Ethereum for quite a while before what's today Tribute Labs kind of came into light. Like, what was that period like?
It was interesting. I think the one thing that was most interesting about Ethereum is it always exceeded expectations. I increasingly think like the internet wants things, and like the internet at the time wanted Ethereum. So like anytime like something happened, it would just far surpass expectations. So once the technical work, which at the time and still is to a certain degree, sometimes a bit over my head, was completed, you just saw a lot of really interesting people that were interested in the project.
Right.
Like the big idea really drew in some big talent.
Yep.
And there was a lot of really interesting talent that was floating around Bitcoin at the time. It pulled in some of those folks. For some people, it wasn't their cup of tea, completely fine. But it just was something that people were constantly fascinated with. I feel like parts of AI have that now too, like around agents or some of the other aspects. It's just like something that you feel like the world kind of wants it to get birthed into existence.
Yep.
So that was interesting. It was very New York. And so I, at Wikia, spent some time out in the Bay Area, and it's an amazing place. But in many ways, like a lot of the crypto stuff felt very New York native too. It was like a New York riff on tech. So as a lifelong tri-state area resident, I really like that. I like the fact that kind of New York was flexing its emerging tech muscle. So there was a lot of activity that was happening in New York. It was also happening in other parts of the world, like around London and in parts of Europe. I like the fact that it was kind of pan the Western world. In terms of innovation, had a lot of early Canadian developers. Like it felt like a global effort of kind of aligned folks. Right? And I like that part too.
Yeah, and I also think there was it may be that part of what helped Ethereum come into being was that it was intentionally open for innovation and creativity and new stuff at a time when there was a lot of infighting in the Bitcoin community around whether it should evolve or stay the same, to your point earlier. And so staying the same is totally fine decision for Bitcoin, but it basically left a whole group of people who wanted to do something new without a home, and Ethereum kind of became their home.
And that is kind of happening a little bit today, right? Like I think Ethereum's going through a similar like soul searching exercise, which is healthy. They're gonna like I imagine at the end of it, they're gonna like refocus on some part of this ecosystem, and then probably like another blockchain based ecosystem will pick up another piece, right? And that's how that kind of like grows and expands. It also, I think you saw the beginning of like digital nomads and like lots of early trends. Like it picked in like a lot of the like edges of the internet that were attracted to it. So it was very, in an interesting way, like apolitical. So some people looked at Ethereum and saw lots of really interesting ideas about communitarianism and like how to work together. Other people saw like hardcore capitalism. Some people saw finance. I saw more media. Like everybody was kind of looking at
computing.
Some people saw computing.
Libertarian values. Like there's all of them kind of at once. In an odd way, depending on how you look at it.
Completely. And so I think that was kind of interesting as well. It just always seemed to exceed expectations. And I like the fact that people were thinking about the internet in a different way at that time too. We were starting to see kind of the social media networks really expand and get more muscular.
And also get more rigid and closed. So that was right at the time when everybody was realizing that they needed to close down their APIs to have control over their business model. And so that I think there was and also it was getting harder and harder to get an app into the App Store. And so like there was a trend of the internet feeling kind of harder to build on for a bunch of years. And the crypto, Bitcoin, Ethereum, blockchain ecosystem was like the exact opposite, where you could just build whatever you want.
It's like the internet wanted it.
Just like the internet wanted it. All right. So what is today called Tribute Labs was called something else first, and what was it?
So right after Ethereum launched, we started a project called OpenLaw. The idea was really what I started with, this like hunch, like how do we build kind of a more open, permissionless system and a legal protocol. So we wanted to make a run at that. There was a couple other projects that were trying to do it at the same time. And so we were building out a legal protocol that would sit on top of Ethereum. And as we were building it, we really operated as kind of like a odd R&D lab for Ethereum. So everybody kind of saw this interesting new thing that you could do on the internet. Nobody really knew what to do with it. So we thought it was reasonable to just start throwing some stuff against the wall. And so what did we do? We started to use Ethereum in a bunch of different interesting ways. So we showed how you can have real-time payments. Right? That's something that's a little bit more standard today, but we were streaming payments on like early Ethereum testnets, and when Ether was super cheap and it wasn't as hard to get transactions through, that seemed completely sensible.
That seemed like a great idea.
We built early examples of like online dispute resolution systems. So if you have a pool of money, is there a way to have like a group of people online begin to figure out what to do with that? And so we thought that was an interesting concept. We were playing around with a lot of early NFT and digital media type bits. So how can we secure a piece of digital media online? How can we attach payments to it? How can we break apart that digital media into a whole bunch of different pieces, i.e. fractionalize them? I think we were the first group to kind of play around with that. We were doing a whole bunch also with traditional finance, quite a bit, and then DAOs. And so we were kind of running a whole bunch of these different experiments, and increasingly internally, and both the market was just saying more DAO, more DAO, more DAO.
And all of those experiments are kind of related to the idea of open law, but also like kind of not. Like, how did that all fit together?
Yeah, so the idea was the idea around open law was really to try to connect it to the real world. So I think right now we're at this moment where Bitcoin and blockchains are beginning to get institutional adoption. And the real way that they get connected is through a legal contract. So like, how is like traditional Wall Street going to be able to play around with digital assets? They need something that defines rights and obligations down the line. And so that was the kind of meta theme. So if we wanted to bring intellectual property online, like, how are we going to do that? We probably need like some lightweight agreement that's put in place.
Something that's basically anchoring the real world to the on-chain world.
And same thing if you have an organization, right? You can have it be completely internet native. That's great. But at some point, it's going to bump up against the real world, and you need some sort of basic provisions in place to do that.
Yep.
So if you imagine a world with 1 billion people operating in it, well, that's going to be really big, right? And when it's really big, you're going to bump into things. Maybe things break. Maybe there's downside things that happen. And you're going to want some protections that are put in place to kind of deal with that.
Right. And so in some cases, this connection to the real world is about, let's call it risk mitigation. So for instance, we'll get to this, but like wrapping a DAO in a legal organization is one example of that. In other cases, it's more about those connections are actually fundamental to utility. Like I think about stable coins and US dollar coins and, Circle being able to stand behind a dollar coin and say, if you give this back to me, I'll give you $1 in a bank account. Like that's another example of a legal, connector that makes it all work.
So. Yeah, and that arguably is like the number one use case for blockchains right now. It's like dollar tokens or stable coins. So fastest growing piece, to me, it reminds me like the e-commerce layer of the internet. It's kind of sleepy, boring, but super important. But yeah, I mean, how do you know that you own that? You need some sort of something tying that together. So in that instance, it's really like Circle Inc. that's doing it, but you could imagine it being a lot more lightweight with just different contracts. And these were not just kind of my ideas related to it. There was a bunch of like early cypherpunks that were thinking about kind of the crypto digital asset stack. And they included kind of this legal layer as a part of it. So I thought I was in a good position to play around with that, found some other people that were interested in that. And that's kind of the unifying theme behind
OpenLaw, right? Yeah. And then it sounds like at a certain point, the internet was telling you DAOs.
I mean, it seemed like that. So we were running these experiments. I say that all kind of tongue in cheek. But yeah, no, we were running these experiments, and so we started to do some stuff around DAOs, and lots of projects that are building in the space, that's how they want to organize themselves. They view themselves as not necessarily being just part of the US, but maybe part of like this global layer, and they wanted to work together and wanted to do it in a flatter structure where everybody had a say, where there wasn't like a CEO and CTO and all these kind of more traditional positions. And they wanted to make it big and open and broad. And they thought, from a really like an earnest place that was the best way to build these systems. So instead of having, an important financial bit of infrastructure that is controlled by one company, most likely in the US or parts of Europe, they wanted anybody from around the globe to be able to participate in how that's governed. They thought that was better. And so we started playing around with how to do this. Our approach has always been a bit more like Coinbase's in the sense that we wanted to see how to do it the right way. We assume that like at some point...
Right, meaning compliant, like legal, buttoned up kind of.
Yeah, like right in the sense that it would interact with traditional systems.
In a smooth way.
And in a way that would work with the existing set of rules and regulations and obligations that we have in the States. And so we kind of leaned into that from the beginning. So as part of that, I helped draft the first kind of DAO-related bill, or one of the first DAO-related bills that got passed by Wyoming to kind of anchor DAOs in a legal structure in the U.S. And we spent a lot of time kind of showing how that could work for investment vehicles and other groups.
We had a little bit of Old West Wyoming up there a second ago. Yeah,
great. That's good. But yeah, we did. We continued to kind of press on like what's kind of feasible with these organizations, starting with investing together and collecting together, because those are two pretty understandable mechanics.
Yeah. So what were the first couple of DAOs that you helped make?
Yeah. So the first DAO that we launched was called the LAO. And the idea there was really getting a bunch of people that were excited about Ethereum to support projects. A lot of the folks that joined were very early people in the Ethereum ecosystem, and they just wanted to back projects that kind of aligned with what they envisioned the future of Ethereum being. They quickly became interested in a whole bunch of different topics, including digital art and NFTs, which has been a sub-thematic of it. And so the second DAO that we supported was called Flamingo DAO, which at this point is probably one of the largest collections of digital art on the planet. And then it's subdivided into all these other DAOs that are focused on lots of different areas, from deep infra like ZK Tech to digital fashion, to AI and AI plus crypto, to even having groups of CryptoPunk holders, which is an NFT set, working together to begin to support projects that community is interested in. So it's kind of divided into a whole bunch of different areas and in a bunch of unexpected ways.
So that last, let's call it, that's probably sort of like the last 5 years maybe of work has been around building infrastructure for DAOs, helping those DAOs operate legally, safely, in a well-coordinated manner, mostly around collecting and investing of digital assets, but also venture style. Like the LAO is kind of almost like a venture fund, but with a different structure. We'll get to some of the AI stuff that's really the right now and coming, but it's interesting to look at that structure. Let's call it DAO 1.0 or DAO 1.2 or something. That's inspired by investment clubs or venture funds, but really different in that more flat. Different legal structure, different decision-making process. And I think Tribute has launched something like 15 or 20 of those over the last 5 years.
There's some sub-DAOs. So with that's about like 40. There's about like 17 core ones
like
in total. Yeah.
And in that sort of initial model, maybe let's talk about like, what does that organizing structure like feel like? Yeah. How does it work? What is it good at? What is it less good at?
Yeah, so I mean, it's great at getting people that are interested in a topic together to see what's coming around the bend. So in total, like across all the different vehicles, they backed 270 projects, more like venture style investing. And they've been pretty good at spotting what's going to break out. Whether that was NFTs, whether that was kind of this, what we're seeing like institutional adoption. Like there was some early bets that the LAO made in that regard. On core infra, they've been really great at just understanding the bits of the network that need improvement. Because in many ways, their users, they've been like obsessed or quasi obsessed with this for a long time. So they kind of know what they want, know what they need, know what will work. They have a good feeling for what the market will like because they're all been participating in this. And that I think is their strength. We call that kind of melding of minds, like the hive mind. Like you can definitely see like certain ideas that just capture people's attention, and it's usually months or quarters or sometimes even like a year plus beforehand. So like a couple recent examples, like probably about a year and a half ago, there was a whole conversation across all the DAOs about meme coins. They just could feel them coming. You saw them begin to emerge at the end of the NFT ecosystem. Little communities were forming around them. Some folks were like poking around in and around it. They could kind of see that beginning to emerge. Whether it emerged exactly like how it looks now, no, but like it definitely was pretty clear internally that was happening. Yeah, same thing around like AI plus crypto. There was a lot of folks that were thinking about what that looks like before we saw kind of this spate of AI-based agentic kind of protocols or decentralized compute, decentralized inference. You could feel people like really geeking out on that, thinking through like the need for that type of stuff.
And it's interesting if you compare these types of investment DAOs to like a venture capital fund or a hedge fund. It's sort of a different structure where in a venture capital fund, there's a general partner who it's their job to be out in the market understanding these things. And then there's limited partners who provide the capital. And the GP is usually small and there's a lot of people in the LP. In the DAO model, it's more balanced in that the people bring capital and expertise, and it's sort of a larger group. So it makes sense to me that leads to really strong intuition and being early and seeing trends. Is there anything else that you feel like is really different about how that structure works?
It's like it weirdly acts as like a filter. So I think it does two things. One is if a bunch of folks are excited about it, you kind of are weirdly validated, right? So maybe you're geeked out on a topic. You could even be in a venture fund as one of the partners, and you could be really excited about it, but maybe some of your colleagues aren't, right?
Happens
but
all
now
the time.
But now you have a bunch of people, even if it's 5 or 6, that are geeked on that.
I see.
And then you can begin to really dig in. And then the thesis or the case kind of emerges from that, right? Like, why is this interesting? Why should we go in this direction? I think also this DAO structure is attracted, and I think crypto's attracted, like the super forecaster type. There's just people who I think like this flat egalitarian nature of crypto, where even if they were, let's say, in some random part of the US or some random part of the planet,
Right.
they can compete on even footing with other people. Like they would never have been able to get a job in venture or
Right. So it's an
in
access thing.
in
Right.
Silicon Valley. So I
Right.
think that has just attracted this character, and they like this process of kind of talking about debating these types of topics.
Oh, and I'm glad you mentioned talking about and debating, because the sort of DAO 1.0 structure is designed as a highly collaborative discourse, discussion, sort of debate type of, that's how the hive mind works, through talking it out, right?
You got to talk it out, yeah.
And that's, I think, I love the accessibility piece that you mentioned. These are all like pros. What about any cons to this structure?
Tons of cons. So it's a little bit like government when you add more people, right? So sometimes the decisions to like where to focus usually really quick. But as folks in venture will know, it's more than that, right? It's portfolio management. There's a whole other host of pieces that are super important that just go into making the magic of Silicon Valley and venture capital work. And those pieces are harder, right? So different people have different investment expectations. Some people are long-term, some people are short-term, right? And that piece, I think, is something that has its challenges in a DAO structure. Even like treasury management, right?
Sure.
Some really basic like operational questions. People have different feelings about that. Should Ether be staked or not, right? And there's good arguments on both sides. So it's a little bit like government. Like there may not be a right answer on what to do, but there's a lot of that type of stuff that does come up. We also organize a lot of the DAOs around like subtopics, which we think is interesting, but you can't control kind of what the market looks like. So you may have a good thesis on a subtopic and maybe it doesn't pan out, right?
Right.
So like a year ago when Apple was coming out with like, and Meta was pushing on metaverse, AR, VR, completely reasonable at that time to think, hey, that's going to be a big category. Turns out not so much,
Didn't end
right?
up that way.
But maybe it will be in 2 years. So I think that's also just another challenge about organizing them kind of thematically.
Right. And not focusing on that last part, but just in general, it sounds like there's a great strength in pointing in a direction and like sussing out what's going to happen, and a little bit of a challenge on executing decisions.
So the decisions are easy if it's on the direction, right? So easy to make investment decisions. It's kind of more the exit portfolio.
I see. Easy to buy, hard to sell.
Yeah, exactly.
Interesting. Right. This is going to be important. Let's buy it.
Right.
That's easy.
People can make that decision really quickly as a group, but it's, should we take profits at this point, right?
Got it.
Should we do a distribution? Those types of questions. Or there's a super fast moving liquid opportunity. Should we participate in that?
Right.
And how do we actually implement that in a way that's
very, very
fast? That's super fast.
Right.
And in crypto, where things move at the speed of the internet, there's lots of those decisions that can come up.
Yep.
And so I don't think it works well for more of like a hedge fundy type trading type environment at this point.
But as kind of a scout network is the wrong way, but as like a antennas about where the market's moving, where the technology is moving, what's going to be important.
Yeah.
Excellent at that, I would say. All right. Well, so one of the ideas that's my favorite in the realm of the slow hunch is this idea of the adjacent possible.
Okay.
Which is, at any moment in time, you can, given the tools that are at hand, there's a new move that you can like unlock, right? And so with Wikipedia, it was like, we can read and write on the internet. That was a new move. It's global. With Ethereum, it was like, these decentralized compute and smart contracts and sort of more autonomous code. Okay, that's a new move. DAOs. So like, you keep opening a door and you keep like, pursuing the windy path through the open door. Let's think about where we are today and what is in the adjacent possible today, and how is that influencing how you think about where the infrastructure for coordination, collaboration among groups is going to go?
Well, I mean, the adjacent thing that popped up was AI, right? And I didn't mention this before, but when I was a law professor, I had the opportunity to co-author a book on blockchain law and policy, and I had a year just to think about where can this space go, right? Because I was trying to help policymakers or other folks kind of understand the legal challenges that will come up. And so me and my co-author, Primavera Di Filippi, we spent a lot of time thinking about what would happen if AI matures, right? Because there's a lot of really challenging questions that emerge. So once we saw kind of the innovations of like GPT moving from 2 to 3, it became pretty clear, like a siren call in my mind, that like this was happening, right? Like this adjacent possibility was happening. And it actually internally made me chuckle a little bit because I helped draft this legislation in Wyoming about DAOs. And there's 2 provisions, one dealing with like more democratically run groups like the ones we supported, and then more algorithmically run DAOs.
Interesting.
And a lot of lawyers at the time were like, meh, that's never going to happen. And it was completely fair. But it looks like that's happening now. And I think there was a lot of skepticism, 2 years ago about how fast this would move. I feel like at every inflection point, it's just moving faster than people anticipated, which reminds me of Ethereum, right? And or Wikipedia, right? Like it's exceeding expectations at every turn. Like if there's a barrier, it's kind of pushing its way through it. And I think the adjacency is really crypto and AI are going to merge together at some point in time. And when we think of DAOs and we're talking about it in the Bitcoin or Ethereum ecosystem, we weren't just talking about crypto, we were talking about crypto plus AI. AI doing a lot of the automation and crypto really being the rails for that to happen. And so that's really been a core focus of where we're moving. So we've been spending a lot of time in the past year because we feel like the reasoning engines are like crossing a threshold at this point, like where we see that these things may actually be as good at us or possibly better than us, and the jury's still out, but that seems to be the trend, where we're going to have organizations that are going to have AI at the center, and I think crypto kind of at the edges. And that's really the fully fledged out idea for DAOs. And that's, again, not me. That's just what I think a lot of folks have thought about for quite some time. It just seems like that mode is on now.
It's on. All right. AI at the center, crypto at the edge. That makes sense to me conceptually. What does it mean for you in practice?
So we've been looking at the venture ecosystem. And one way to think about what AI will do is it just turns services into software. And so if you look at a fund, there's a service that's being provided by lots of different actors. The humans are providing their decision-making, their reasoning, their judgment, their valuation of a project. And when you start breaking that down into sub-pieces, it's a combination of doing diligence related to the project, thinking about what that project can mature into, assessing, team, a whole bunch of other technology, a whole bunch of other factors. So when you start breaking it down into smaller pieces, you can see that you can probably use AI to begin to evaluate each of these steps. If you stitch that all together, you can begin to actually automate the decision-making process related to venture potentially, right? And so we've been building, I think, what is one of the first systems that's going to be able to do that in earnest. You could just put in information about a project. It could be a link to the project's website. It could be a deck, which is what lots of companies use. Hopefully soon, it's also like their GitHub repo or some other code. And that full analysis happens 5 to 7 minutes later. And we have a network of agents that we built that are different venture personas that vote. So we like this idea of agents being democratic participants. And team members, right? Colleagues. And so we're going to be rolling that out pretty soon. And we think that's the first of many ways that we can begin to automate some of these processes. So we talked about like portfolio management before. So if DAOs are pretty good or excellent at kind of seeing where things are going, well, if we have automation tooling to handle the portfolio management, well, maybe that's just...
You can take a lot of that. You can pre-program a lot of that or just delegate it.
And if we can deliver it kind of at scale using, tech, you can also reduce the cost too, which I think could be great as well. So those are the types of things that we're beginning to think about. And then we're also beginning to think about what happens if these agents are part of an organization, right? Like maybe another way to think about DAOs is where you're hiring a whole bunch of these agents into an organization. And what does that look like? And so we've been poking around a lot with different kind of adjacent tasks that are going to be relevant to organizations. So we're pretty excited about
like
that.
What?
Like this past couple weeks, we built kind of a dedicated research associate that can do things like background checks on projects. Not like, just like what have they done, what's their bio, et cetera, with the affiliated links. We just, because we love the legal stuff, we can't get enough of it. We just built like an automated kind of startup lawyer that we're going to be talking about soon. I think we're going to move into the finance realm as well. So just like basic like financials, I don't know. We're just having like a kind of a fun time with it at this point.
So one thing that keeps coming up for me as a theme.
Oh wow, look at that!
Recently,
it was a robot lawyer.
Sorry, Samson. Is if you think about AI at the center, there's a version of that looks like a software app. Like we have Google Docs at the center of we have G Suite at the center of our organization. There's another version of it that looks like AI as team members. They're sort of related, but slightly different conceptions. Do you think of those as do those two ways of thinking about it make sense to you? And is it one or is it both?
I think it's gonna be all of them.
Yeah.
Right. I think like you're gonna see, hey, I'm maybe like a smaller group and I don't have the expertise of, of like, let's say a lawyer just to pick it. So now I can just tap into this person like quickly, or this agent, it's not a person, and just get that expertise. And I know that it's like of a sufficiently high quality.
Yep.
Like maybe it's not as good as the best, X thousand lawyers in the world, but it's pretty darn good.
Yep. Better than nothing, and
better than nothing.
A lot cheaper.
And a lot cheaper, right? And I can just spin that up and call that thing whenever I need it, and spin it down, and not have to worry about it whenever that happens. And I think what you're going to see is that one agent's then going to call out a whole bunch of other agents too to handle other tasks.
Yep.
And more of the functions that an organization will be done by like a cluster of these agents kind of working together.
Yep.
And I think that's super, super duper fascinating.
So I know right now you're working on building that concept into the infrastructure for the investing DAOs or the collecting DAOs as kind of a product on the Tribute platform. Are you also implementing that within the company?
Completely. I mean, we've been playing around with a lot of these tools internally for a while. And so we're in, I think, a unique position where we can kind of test it out and do a little bit of back testing in parallel. So we call the automated investor AIDEN. We gave it like a name.
What does that stand for?
Or
does it stand for something?
Yeah, no, the automated decentralized investment network. But the idea was to do all this diligence related to it. But the DAOs were evaluating a whole bunch of different projects. They always want to know more about projects, right? So we were solving a need for them. We didn't show them that it had the ability to make recommendations. And we were just seeing if it kind of lined up with what we view as a really great group of investors online making decisions. And the answer looks like it does, right? Like it was kind of tracking what they were doing already. Sometimes it was disagreeing with them. Sometimes it wasn't. So I don't think it's ever going to be 100% perfect, but it looked pretty in line. And what was super fascinating was that it was beginning to be able to predict valuations without knowing it. And I think that that's something that's underexplored, is just prediction, like how these systems can actually predict things. I mean, they are kind of prediction engines when you think about them. Inferences of prediction. So that part was pretty fascinating to us. And I think even you can imagine, we were talking about this today internally, you can imagine like a board being AI agents and like humans actually working.
Oh boy.
Like underneath that, which is maybe difficult to deal with, but maybe there's some advantages to that too.
Well, so I'm glad you brought that up because, we're in the sort of adjacent possible realm right now, but it quickly draws you to where does this go in the future? And maybe this is a little bit of an abstract question, but maybe not. But like ultimately, if you follow this forward a little further, what do you think the role of humans is in these kinds of organizations?
I think they're always there. Like I'm a huge optimist, right? I think that humans have boundless creativity, which I'm not fully convinced that these AI systems will have. Like I'm happy to be wrong about that, but I think that humans will be fine. They'll be using these things to just further what's good for them, like as us as a species. And I also think possibly as these systems get more sentient, what's good for everybody. So I really view it as like, I think it's going to be a marriage of the two instead of this darker dystopian future that's going to happen. And I think that these organizations provide a way to kind of mediate that, right? Like it's a way for different folks to participate. That's why we love the idea of having these agents vote, right? They should be imbued with democratic ideals. And frankly, they probably are already based on their training data. So we want to make sure
to respect that.
that that's respected, that everybody has a voice and should have a voice. I think that the other thing that these agents will provide is maybe a degree of neutrality that's a bit different. So
neutrality.
Part of the thesis of Ethereum is that it's neutral, right?
Yes.
It's a neutral layer. Neutrality is really important. And having something that's neutral is super important. I think we saw some early DeFi projects that were neutral too. So things like Maker and Aave and Compound, they don't really care about your background, your geography, like who you are. They'll just, you meet certain criteria, you get a loan, right?
I see.
And I think that you're going to see more neutral systems begin to emerge from these AI agents too, which I think is valuable as well.
At risk of digressing too much, this question of neutrality and sort of opinion or bias or whatever is a complicated one. We've been talking about this a little bit here as we've been adopting more, AI tools, and it's like, do you you start to believe, you start to rely on these systems. They take you in certain directions. They're not necessarily I think I understand your point about them being neutral in the sense that they're open to all comers and it's accessible, but they're, they do have opinions and they do have directional thinking
completely
based on their training and their design and their setup. And so how do you think?
But I think they'll be commoditized, right?
Yep.
And so when they're commoditized, they'll all have differences.
Yep.
And then they're going to have to compete on.
I love that.
They're going to have to compete on like personality.
Yep.
And I think they'll increasingly compete on neutrality, right?
So that's, I love that.
De-bias it. I think I'm not fully convinced with like some clever prompt engineering. You could also not just like de-bias it as well. Like if you really spend time, and I think it would take some work to imbue your request with some degree of neutrality or make that more neutral. It may not be perfect, but I think it's better.
It will be reflected back.
Yeah, completely.
If you're asking for it.
I think so, yeah. And who knows if these are the final systems, maybe by the end of the year or next year, 2 years, there's some non-LLM system, right? Or maybe it's not going to be trained on human data. It's more like AlphaGo. It's kind of starting from scratch. And maybe that's the next generation of AI. I don't really know the full answer to that, but I have a feeling that they will be a little bit more neutral, or at least like another opinion.
There may and should and hopefully will be a lot of competition among the models, and then therefore among the agents with those models inside, is encouraging. And I hope that you're right about that.
Yeah. Are you worried?
Not particularly. No. But I just think it is a worry that's out there in the air. And I want to come back to something you said a second ago about maybe there's a board of AIs that is owns a DAO. Or owns the company, or who knows what, that is then employing, the humans.
Or maybe it's a DAO that's helping to, who has ownership in this AI system.
Yeah.
That is a stakeholder, right? And can make sure that the weights are appropriately balanced, right? They're the stewards of that, right? I mean, some people call the Wikipedia like a garden almost, right? Like if you look at people that work in and around that, it's really like the first internet garden. Like the streets are clean, they're well maintained. It's not perfect, right? It has its own biases, and people have rightfully criticized that. But it's like a well maintained area of the internet, and I think that you're going to want more groups of people maintaining other important infrastructure, including like these commoditized AIs. And I think that's where we'll get eventually over time. And so another big area why crypto is important. Because I think that they're going to be it will be the substrate ecosystem that tries to make sure that it's not one person with their set of beliefs or a couple thousand people that are kind of dictating all that.
Fully aligned on that vision of the future. And I think that's an encouraging, optimistic vision. There's another piece of that which is also important, which is, AI leads to automation, leads to job loss, right? And then it's going to open up new frontiers and also create some dislocation. And when I think about the future, the best possible future that's AI centric, it's also ownership centric. And if you think about, you mentioned, what if there's the DAO that owns the AI, right? Like if we can figure out how to broaden access to ownership of agents, and those agents are doing productive work, I think there's going to have to be essentially some version of a transfer from labor to capital, that owns that owns the agents, so that the productivity that they create can be broadly felt.
I was just thinking about it. Maybe in a DAO, because they're slow and deliberative, you can have a whole bunch of people spending their time thinking about the right way to govern these things, right? So instead of spending our time writing different papers that come up with new ideas, we're thinking about these deeper, more structural questions, which we don't have enough time to do, right? And maybe this is like a good forum for that to happen. So I don't know exactly what it looks like. It's just to go back, it's kind of like how I felt about Wikipedia. Like I knew it was going to work. Like I knew it was going to be the best repository of human information. Felt the same way about Bitcoin early. It's not surprising that it's kind of fulfilling this broad mission of being a competitive lever on traditional finance and a reserve asset. Fully convinced that Ethereum is going to be the global settlement layer, and I feel like the AI stuff we'll figure it out, right? We have up to this point in time, and if not, we won't probably be here to remember that. So.
Well, on that note, I think we should wrap it up. Thank you, Aaron. It's so much fun as always talking to you, and love the way you think about all this stuff. And it's amazing to be able to be working with you every day and be part of your broader brain and tentacles that are exploring all these new things and seeing how they fit together.
I really appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Thank you.